speaker session today is an introduction on fundraising, and our speakers are Alyssa Brownsmith and Jennifer Halinda. Alyssa is our Strategic Partnership Manager at Science Fair Foundation BC. She has over 15 years of experience working with STEM partners and executing partnerships and events. And Jennifer is our Partnership Manager with a focus on grants and corporate sponsorship. She has over 9 years of experience raising funds for nonprofits and forming long-term partnerships.
Oh, you good people to know.
Okay. Really well timed. Okay.
Grants, that's important.
Yeah, so with that, I will turn it over to Alyssa and Jen.
Well, hello, and thank you for that wonderful welcome. So over the next little bit, Jen and I are going to talk to you guys about a number of fundamentals, best practices that, we have picked up along the way. But first, I want to see from a show of hands the number of people who have done any fundraising before. Excellent. It's an interesting thing, and there's no one right way or wrong way to do it. It's strategically thinking and looking at the situation and being able to identify what is going to be the right fit for the challenge that you have and the people that you have in your network and beyond who could potentially help with that challenge. So with that, I'm going to share a little presentation. Just bear with me while I figured out how to do this on Team. All right, let me know if you can see that.
Up.
Okay, so we're good. All right, so as we mentioned, the first step is to identify. So when we think about fundraising and you go to the dictionary, it says the seeking of financial support for a charity, cause, or other enterprise. Well, that's a pretty cookie cut answer. And the reality is it's a lot of different things. So when we think about, what do you believe when you're seeking a sponsor? And there's a lot of myths that I need to have a complete sponsorship deck before I start reaching out. That if I send a lot of generic emails out to everyone, that'll produce results. That I need to secure a lot of sponsors. That I need to take any money that's offered to me. That I need to only target the large and big name companies. And that my job is done when the money's come in. The reality of that is a lot different. So when you think about a sponsorship deck, that's your sales piece. That's the really pretty package that says, hey, this is what we're doing. This is who we are. This is what we can do for you. And that is an important aspect of it, but it isn't the only thing you need to get the ball rolling. What you should always make sure you have is a really great idea of what the event plan is. So talk to the people on your team. What are they organizing? When are they organizing it? Where is it going to be? How many people do they expect to be there? When you know those basic metrics, you can have that initial outreach. So you can call people and say, hey, we have this event coming up in April. This is what it's going to entail. I'd love to talk to you about it more. Then you can get those meetings in the calendar that are going to allow you to get the ball rolling while you're still developing that sales piece to be able to share with them. When you talk about communication, personalize it. Create yourself a template, but when you're doing that, personalize it in a way that mentions that maybe they've supported you in the past. Maybe there's a personal connection. Create it so it actually says it's speaking to the individual and not just a whole bunch of information in an email that, as we all know in our busy lives, we don't barely skim anymore. One of the tips that I use to ensure that I get, the meetings and the time to actually explain what I'm looking for is to utilize services like Calendly, where you can create a little link where people can click on it and they find your up-to-date calendar, they book a scheduled meeting with you. There's no back and forth emails trying to find the right day or time. And the other thing I would say is work smarter, not harder. If you know how much you're going to be able to do, if you know the properties that you have, whether it's, signage on site or whether you know that there's going to be an e-newsletter or there's communication that's going to the schools and it's happening at this number of times, then you can know how much value you are offering. So when you're pricing your sponsorship, say you need food for the volunteers and you think it's going to cost you $300, but in that $300, you're also giving them X number of signs on site, or a banner, or it's going in an e-newsletter. So all of that has value. So then you look at it and say, okay, well, instead of $300, that's actually worth $1,000. And then you're being able to say, okay, now I've created an opportunity where someone knows what the value is. It's marketing that individual or that company doesn't have to do in the community anymore, so that we're taking care of it. And they go, right, that is a good value, because otherwise I have to pay someone on my team to do all of that where you're doing it for me. So I see the value. Here you go. Here's the money. And it's a lot easier to do that then than it is to go, wow, we actually gave them a lot, but only charged them $300. Next year, I want to ask them for $1,000. And they're going to go, well, I don't see the change in value. So you've kind of set yourself up for failure in that capacity. So it's work smarter, not harder. You'll be able to achieve your financial target if you understand the product you're delivering. And I will put this over to Jen.
Great. So talking about aligning with the right fit. So, there's so many grant and sponsorship and partnership opportunities out there. But usually what it comes down to is aligning with the values of the organization. So for example, if we're going after funding for science fair programming, there's a lot of companies out there where we may not fit that mold. So what we try to do is look for opportunities that fund youth education, specifically with science. And there's also some funding out there for teachers, right? For educator outreach and providing all of the teachers in the school systems with the tools they need. So when you're sort of looking for organizations that you can align with for funding, you want to look at their values and what's important to them, and make sure that it's a good fit, because there's no use in wasting. Like, we just went through a grant opportunity where we were trying to line up with their values and their timelines, and it actually didn't work for us. So we walked away from it. So sometimes that's going to happen as well. And it's not just the big fish. Like, we all know that there's large companies out there that are constantly giving. Some of them are the banks or insurance companies, government agencies. Look to your own backyard, because you probably have some current relationships that support organizations or schools in the community. And a lot of that comes down to doing research, which we'll talk about in a minute. And anyone where you have a personal connection is always a great foot in the door. So whether it's yourself or maybe someone that sits on your board or on a committee that you're with, sometimes they can get you in to speak to the right individual about getting some support. And just understanding that the work doesn't end with the dollars. So building relationships are beneficial in so many reasons. People don't just want to write a check and hand it over anymore. They really want to see their dollars put to work. So it's really important that you have touch points throughout the process. If you've received a gift from somebody, that they understand what's happening. And it doesn't have to be every day, but there's some trust there, right? They want to make sure their money is being used for the right thing. And again, you can tailor that based on what you feel is important to them. So we'll talk about listening to their needs in a minute. But it's really about delivering what we promised we would do with the funding. So keeping that relationship going, providing updates, key dates, and showing them how their dollars ultimately impacted youth in science. And then just checking in, right? Because there might be an opportunity to get them on board for future years or for other projects. So always leave that door open and have touch points with your grantees and funders and partners.
Excellent. Thank you. So that leads us into setting yourself up for success. And it's, like I said, it's not a one size fits all. There's going to be different variations of what's going on in the situation that are going to shape it. But it's ensuring that you create a basic framework to do self check-in and identify what's going on. So when we start thinking about that, we already kind of touched on it a little bit, but know the event or the product that you're looking to get partnership on. So the basics about, when those key dates are. If for some reason you maybe need to get some sign off on a logo usage, knowing when the marketing team needs that sent to print so that you can ensure that the other side knows when they need to give you approval by. Know if there's volunteer opportunities that you can utilize as a leverage to entice the other organization to say, hey, we actually want to get involved in the community. We're trying to find ways for our staff to support. And if you know if there's a volunteer opportunity, it's a really great way to get people involved. It's knowing the age demographic. Who else is coming outside of, if in regards to science fairs? Yes, there'll be youth, but is there anyone else in the community involved? Is there any other industry involved that they might need to be aware of? It's also really great to know whether, you know, a specific event targets accessibility or BIPOC, or if there's Indigenous components, because a lot of times organizations have different mandates within them. And if you are able to identify some of these and have the metrics to support it, it's usually something that people will look to and potentially add your organization or event higher up the list, because it does touch on those things that they need in the community for their giving components.
My favorite part. I always call myself Nancy Drew. Do you guys remember Nancy Drew?
Matthew, if you're in the building, could you please come to the office? That was Matthew. Thank you.
Sorry, I just realized that my thing wasn't muted. Sorry.
That's okay. So I love doing research on any potential partner, and thank goodness for Google and the internet, because one thing that I find is that for most people that give in any way, they will usually feature it on their community page on their website. So that's the first place that I go. And I take a look at what organizations these potential partners might support. I also take a look at their giving model. So you know, again, we speak back to what types of causes they support, how they support, because sometimes it's not always financial. Sometimes it's through volunteer hours, or sometimes it's through sending speakers or paying for equipment or things like that. And then I also take a look at what type of gifts they offer. So sometimes you're going to find organizations that will make donations between $1,000 and $5,000. Sometimes you're going to see a grant portal where you can go and apply for up to $100,000. So understanding how companies give, and whether it's through a foundation or through their own local office, etc., getting the right contact information. And then also sometimes it's really good to pick up the phone, especially when you're looking at grant funding. If there's an opportunity to introduce yourself and your organization to a grantee or a grantor, absolutely do it. The one thing that I used to be scared of when applying for grants is I was always scared of phoning them and like, oh, they're going to think I want their money. They want to give you their money, right? And so they want to help you prepare the most successful application that you can. And it's also an opportunity to find out what's really important. We just wrote a grant where letters of support were a huge factor in their decision making, and we did reach out to a few people in our regional committees. So thank you for sending in letters of support. But knowing how that weighed so heavily in their decision making helped us prepare a better grant and have a better chance of getting the funding. So, so doing the research, also understanding when their deadlines are. Like right now, it's grant season is really heavy right now, and a lot of them are due by the end of September. Probably tying in with their fiscal year and looking ahead at their marketing dollars or their funding dollars. So getting a good grasp of when things are due, and making sure that every single attachment they're asking for is there. So if they're asking for any financial background or references or the actual plan for your program or your science fair, making sure that that's all included. So really getting a picture of what they require, what they need, what's important to them, and then doing a work back plan and figuring out, okay, do we have the time and the resources to get this together, to do an ask? What are we going to need, and lay out the plan, and so that you've got all the tools ready to go for when you're ready to approach.
Mm-hmm. I would also add into that is documenting what you research, so that you have that historical reference. So if for some reason it doesn't work for this year, you can set a reminder in your calendar to look into it earlier next year, so that you can get ahead of the things that maybe are needed to put together a proposal. Or give somebody else in the organization who might be stepping in to help with those things next year, so that they know what was needed, they know what was talked about, and they can kind of see that at a glance, so that they are better prepared to help support in that initiative as well. So that also comes with listening, and listening is a lot of things. But when you're in a meeting with someone and they're talking to you about what they usually give, when they usually like to receive applications, what are they saying to you? Like, what are they not saying to you? Like, read between the lines. If there's specific things that you're mentioning and you're not met with any verbal cues of understanding, acknowledgement, utilize that to kind of go back and readdress it and ask them if if they're the right person to be speaking to, if there's other information that they require, if they don't understand specific aspects of what you're asking. And then if you're in a video call or in person, like, how's their body language? Do they seem interested? If it's like, you can tell a lot about a situation, whether it's maybe they're not the right person to be speaking to, maybe your organization doesn't align, or maybe it's just not the right time to talk to them. But utilizing those cues, both verbally and body language, will really help to understand where you're at. And if somebody is, not returning your calls right away, it's not necessarily that, they're not interested. We all know that there's so much going on and we're so inundated with information. So if you make it as easy as possible for them to understand what you're looking for, the chances of you having more success in your ask will definitely be there.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add is a lot of times I'll try to mirror, like, if I'm on a call or in a meeting with someone and they say removing barriers to education for children is really important to us, I'll mirror that mention of removing barriers in my application or when I'm sending it to them. So I try to use words that they use. So listening and picking up on certain words that are important to them can also help when you're putting together a pitch.
So that also goes into like how you create rapport with somebody. People are more willing to give to you if you have a really great relationship, and be genuine and understand what they're looking for and ask them the questions. Treat them like a human being. As much as we always like to think, oh, I have a need, you're my solution. At the end of the day, people love to help people that they are invested in. You've created that rapport with them that they like, oh, you check in with me, you ask me how things are going. We have, that ability to have a conversation before we just start a phone call and all of a sudden it's like, hey, I need money, can you help me? It's like when you treat somebody with that kind of respect and that understanding, and it's a mutually give and take relationship, they're going to think about you before you even reach out. They're going to go, oh yeah, I've earmarked those funds for you, because they enjoy working with you. You have a good rapport. Jen, you have other things you want to touch on this one?
Yeah, I think it's not just a one-stop shop where you're saying, we need money, thank you for the money, bye. Like, creating that rapport. You might run into them at an event, they might show up at your science fair. Being able to know who they are, what they look like, what's important to them. And when we talk about the sort of stewardship of the relationships, it's is really understanding what's important to them too, because some funders don't want to be known, like, they just want it to be an anonymous gift. They don't want any hurrah, hurrah. But then we have some funders that want to shake the hand of your, school administrator, or want to see their logo up in lights. So it's really by getting to know them and understanding what's important to them will really help you sort of build out the experience for them as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd also say to be solution oriented when you're talking to them. Even if there isn't something listed in your sponsorship deck that you outline, maybe there's something that they really value that you haven't outlined, but you can make it happen. So if you're solution based, you're creating an opportunity for them that they're like, wow, like, it wasn't within the scope, but you made it happen. And you have to obviously pick and choose like how extensive that is based off of what the ask is. But if you're willing to create customization for them and help them, whether it's, finding opportunities for volunteerism, or maybe there's something that they're doing that somewhat aligns with what you're doing and you have an ability to cross promote it, that goes a long way to create that really great relationship. So when, you have that situation that you're needing to talk to them again about a new opportunity, they're going to have a much more positive feeling towards you. Great. Timing. So timing is everything. And it really goes into, you know, this initial thoughts on the organizing of your upcoming fairs for 2023. And having that initial outreach with individuals will definitely work in your favor if you start the ball rolling soon. And like we kind of touched on earlier, you don't have to have your entire ask drawn out into a pretty little package, but if you give someone enough lead time and say, hey, just earmark in your calendar, you know, the 2023 fair is X date. I'd love to get a call in with you to start talking about, you know, what we're planning on doing, what it looks like, and let you know a little bit about, you know, where you could potentially fit. And then that at least, you know, gets it in their head. Yes, I need to earmark some time. I understand that this is coming up. I'm earmarking some funds when I'm, you know, talking about my budget allocations for the year. So it really creates that opportunity where we're going into, you know, a bit of financial uncertainty. People are really starting to tighten their spending on their budgets. So having that ability to give people enough time to understand what you're doing will ensure that you're not automatically negated from any opportunity. Another thing I think would be really important to document is understanding when their giving is. When is their fiscals? Not everybody is a full calendar year. Some people's fiscals start in the spring, some people start in the summer or the fall. As Jen was mentioning, there's a lot of people that are accepting grants right now for fall so that they're ready to execute for January 2023. So knowing when people's money is allocated is really, really important to make sure that you're not left on the sidelines and waiting a whole entire year to be considered again. And the other thing I would say is know what else is going on in your community. So if you have a smaller community where there are some larger organizations there that do tend to get a lot of asks from other organizations in the industry, what's going on that may be a competition for you so that when you're looking at it going, my fair is here, this is the organization I'm asking, but I also know this other organization has a similar event or similar in the same sense of concept of maybe it's in sciences, maybe it's in technology, maybe it's in something that people would potentially look at it as being so similar that they're choosing between your organization or theirs, so that you can kind of get ahead of it and know when you need to get those asks in. Anything else, Jen, you want to touch on timing?
That's great.
Excellent. Okay. Want to go on this one?
Well, it's all about communication, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think one thing I'd like to just bring into this fold, I mean, we've already talked about the listening skills and all of that, but is when you're, you know, the trend over the past 10 years in fundraising has been people want to see impact for their dollar, right? So a lot of times it's about reporting out on what the outcome was. And, you know, some funders want to support existing programs and they don't expect to see a lot of growth. Others want to see, like, there's one that we're looking at right now. It's a COVID recovery resilience fund. They want to see, like, you know, how numbers dropped and then how we're going to improve them. So it's about being able to communicate effectively how those dollars will be put to work for the impact as well. And then through those communication tools, there's a lot of times they might ask you for a, you know, project report at the end, and being able to communicate that effectively as well. And again, just going back to my comment about mirroring some of the wording and language that your funder might be using. Also determining the best way to communicate is important. You know, do they prefer an email? Are there report forms they already have that you might need to fill out? And then, and always being honest. Like I find sometimes if all the funding isn't used up for that particular project, you can go back to them and say, you know, we've got this extra $1,800. Can we put it towards this? But always kind of keep them abreast on what's happening. And it, like I said, it doesn't have to be weekly. It's just touch points and keeping them involved and communicating back and forth on the progress of the project and then the final results.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I'd touch on is, like, it's always one thing to get the funding and then just start to action it. And, you know, you're doing the event and everyone's involved, but having that initial email that you send out to them and thank them for their support, give them like an update, like, hey, this is what's coming down the pipe. You can expect to see some recognition in this email that goes out, or, you know, we have X number of signs on site and we're really excited. making sure people are aware. If you have a larger funder who's, put a substantial amount of sponsorship into something, send them those updates and ensure that, you're touching base with them. How are they doing? Are they aware of, what's going on? Is there any questions that they have? Because then that'll allow them to not think, oh, I gave you the money and I didn't hear from you until next year when you need to think about it again. And some people won't really want a lot of hand holding, but there is nothing to lose by being proactive. Everything will be, oh, this person's front of mind. We really appreciate how proactive you are. We really appreciate you keeping us in the loop of, how our funds were spent. Oh, there's another opportunity that's kind of come up that we can get our staff involved. Cool. Now I know about that. So it's like having that rapport again. So it's communicating so that they know what's going on and that they can get ahead of it. And then if they're on site because they want to see their fundraising dollars in action, make sure you check in with them, set up a meeting to say, hey, let's meet by the, X booth at 3:00. And I'd love to walk around with you and talk about things. You're creating that really great rapport so that they know that they can count on you. They understand that it's not just, oh, I showed up and, I didn't get to speak to anybody. And then the one thing I am really, really put a lot of value behind is making sure that you don't wait too long after something is over to thank them. I like to write a template, write everything out, schedule it to go out so that if there's something I need to go in and adjust, I can go and adjust it, but it's done and it's scheduled and it'll go out within 24 hours of the end of the event so that there is no delay and it's not 6 months later. Oh, by the way, this is what we did. It's thank you so much. This is the success that you've made. This is what we were able to accomplish together. I'd love to set up if there's a substantial sponsorship involved and that somebody's had a lot of moving parts, I'll say, okay, let's set up a debrief meeting. I would love to hear how it went on your side. And then you're able to have that communication and understand what's going on, and they can expect to understand that you have that level of service for them. Jen, you want to talk about following through?
And again, just reiterating the following through on the whole process, right, is keeping the cycle moving forward, making sure you're following up. If they have any questions, getting back to them and giving them, showing them the success, right? People want to see successful projects through their funding. Even I find even things like personal touches, and I mean, you could even have students write thank you letters, right? Like there's so many different ways that you can keep the ball rolling with a partner, and just making sure that you're following through on everything. Like they might need a tax receipt. I don't know, depending on the funder. They might need some information. So just using your own resources. Like I live and die by my Google Calendar, but we also have Salesforce now. So we're able to put in activities to remind ourselves that things are due or to follow up, etc. So, and that all sort of falls under donor stewardship. So, having a little checklist of all the touch points that you want to follow through on with any potential partner or donor can be super helpful. And then just using whatever tool you use to track your time and your activities as well.
Yeah, on that as well. Something that we do when we're creating a sponsorship is to create, and you can use it in Excel, what we call a fulfillment tracker. And it'll list out the company, and it'll list out all the different things that you said you were giving them for the money that they're giving you. And it's a way to say, yep, we did it. We executed it on September 13th, 2022. You can even hyperlink it to an example of that piece. And then it allows you to know that you're going item by item to ensure that you've accounted for everything that you promised for the funding that was given. Another thing that I think is really important and sometimes gets forgotten in the busyness of planning is just getting examples of that. So if a newsletter went out, save a PDF of it and put it into a folder. If you saw something on social media, take a screen capture and put it into that folder so that instead of at the end of the event, you trying to find all of these items, you have them already organized. So when you're creating a report that shows all the things that you did really amazing for the sponsor, you don't have to go searching for them. They're there for you. And you can create that really great report that they're going to go, wow, okay, I totally understand where my money went. And I'm really excited to do this again. So it's just making sure that you're following through. Another tip on that report is start it early. Create yourself a really great template so that when you get to the end of the event, you're not having to start from scratch, figuring out all the different things you want to talk about. It's a plug and play. And I always look at it and go, okay, at what level do I customize that to a specific sponsor? And at what level do I just create a really great overview document of this is how many people showed up. This is how many projects we had. This is how many social media posts we had. This is how many e-newsletters. Here's the readership. And so you can create all of that so that when someone looks at it, they go, I understand the event. I understand the impact it made. I understand where my marketing value was. And then they go, okay, at the end of the day, let's set up another meeting for the future to potentially do this again, because it creates that understanding of they see the value. And when money is becoming tight right now because people are worried about spending, it's really important to like stand above everybody else and say, this is what we're able to offer you that has really great value. Anything else on that, Jen?
No.
No? Great. So that brings us back to our definition of fundraising. And while it is seeking financial support, fundraising really is understanding your product, doing your research, creating those relationships, and identifying opportunities to provide a solution that not only benefits you, but also the partner, because that's the most important. You're a solution provider for the partner, and in return, you're getting the funds you need to do the role you need. So it has to be a two-way street. It has to be always looking at how you can help someone. And when you go in with that mentality, you end up becoming super successful. You end up getting the revenue and more than you require because people want to work with you.
Yeah, that's sort of why I think we call them partners now, not just funders or or sponsors, because it's about creating that partnership, right? And having them benefit from their investment as well.
Mm-hmm. So before we kind of go into Q&A, we just want you guys to be aware that we're here to help you. We like to think of ourselves as a really great ally. Both Jen and myself are available for questions, any additional help. If you have a need or if you think it would be really beneficial to have further support in this capacity, speak to Sarah and we can look at how we can support that, whether it's some how-to sessions or doing like a working session where we go through an exercise of a case study and kind of practice what we're doing. And then, yeah, if there's times that you think, oh, we're in my community and we have this opportunity to go for, you know, this really large sponsorship that's going to help us, reach out to us and we're happy to help support you in that capacity as well.
Hey, Angela.
Okay, so that leads us into some Q&A. And I hope
Peter
it wasn't
has a-
super overwhelming because I know that's a lot.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alyssa and Jen. Peter does have his hand up.
Thanks.
He seems a bit busy though.
Oh, hey, Peter.
Sorry, guys. Of course, someone calls another administrator calling for help. Great presentation. Thank you. You know, it's always good to hear from how people do their fundraising, and you provide some really good tips on how to get better fundraising. I know that's always a challenge, especially when you're doing regionals, to try to get lots of funding to support all of those different awards and such. Quick question: you mentioned in one part of it there might be opportunity for grants. Do you guys or maybe other people like? I would love to apply for grants if I knew which grants to apply for. Is there a list that you guys kind of like make or share out or could suggest?
Well, there's different resources you can look at. And sometimes, again, depending what region you're in, you might want to start there. And sometimes it can be as easy as putting in grants West Kootenay, and you might get some links to grants as well. It also depends on the businesses in your community. You probably want to start there and taking a look at some of the larger companies that might offer some funding, et cetera. And then there's always government funding and provincial funding grants. But there's some different resource links that give a list of grants that are out there. So we can put something together and share it with your.
Oh, that would be awesome. That would be super helpful. Like I know right now our school district supports most of our, you know, prize support. but there isn't, obviously usually at the locals, there isn't a lot of prize support to begin with. But definitely when you move to the regionals, it's, there's a lot. So, even just, kids getting, kids buy in when they're like, oh, hey, I got a door prize. And then all of a sudden I'm going to come back next year, and just getting them in the door or getting them interested in trying science and trying science fair. Once they do it, they usually get hooked. Thanks, Darcy. I see you posting stuff in the. Thank you.
Yes, thank you as well. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, hi, Katrina.
Sorry I was late.
That's okay.
My class is finished, and then of course I forgot about the PA. Oops.
No worries. Yeah, we can put together a quick list of all the grants that we know of anyway. They may not all be applicable depending on your region and all this other stuff, whether you're a registered society or not. But we can definitely put together a few as they keep coming up in chat. And we can share that with the email that goes out afterwards as well. I'll take note of all of these that Darcy's throwing up too.
Thanks, guys. Yeah. Just, writing grants is a pain. If you guys want to write grants, I'll sign.
Art. It's
I'm
an
happy
art.
to sign. I'll just sign.
Sarah and I just did a 35-page grant, right, Sarah?
33.
33. There you go.
A very specific grant where you had to use the right font and the right size and the right color
one of those.
and everything.
Yeah.
Every single supporting document had to be in the specifics.
Well, good luck. Hopefully you get it. 30.
We've already planned our celebration dinner if we get it. It's also through a funding cycle, right? So that's like, for an organization our size, and we're looking ahead, we're applying for certain grants that are more than 1 year. But then that's also something that, it's really up to the funder. Like some funders only fund 1 year and that's it. Or some will fund you for 2 years and then tell you, then we move on to other new opportunities to fund. So
cool.
Yeah, and that's where history is your best friend. Like no matter how you can keep track of any sponsors you've had in the past or people that have supported your science fairs, having that history is your best friend because you can see who's given, when they gave, who was their contact. And then if you were to hand it over to someone else, they would have all of that. As we all know, knowledge is power. So the more that we track and share with each other on funders and funding, that we got or didn't get and why, like a lot of times funders will send back a letter telling you why you didn't get the money. And those are so valuable because if you go to reapply for that grant, you can pull that letter up and go, okay, they wanted more description on the program. They wanted more letters of support. And then you can make sure the next time you go for it, you're improving upon the last one. Sometimes they won't tell you at all why you didn't get it.
And sometimes it all changes and it's totally moot.
Oh yeah, one grant we did, like we submitted it and then we found out they changed their whole giving funding model and that we weren't applicable anymore. And I'm like, I wish we would have known that before we submitted the grant because we were in your giving criteria before, but that doesn't happen that often.
Yeah. And going back to the work smarter, not harder, if you have an opportunity to have a discussion, see if you can get a multi-year deal with someone. Say, hey, 2-3 years, like let's lock it in. And then all you're doing is fulfilling on it and executing it instead of taking all of that time. And I know a lot of individuals, they're on limited time, you have other priorities, you're only allocating a certain amount of your time. It's not a full-time job for you. So make it as easy as possible. Right. I know I've got half my sponsors. So now I only have to, look for new ones for the other things. And then that just makes it a lot easier to manage. So you're just pushing the button and making things happen. And if it's already locked in, it's already locked in. It's good money.
Yeah, and one thing I'll note on that too is just there's some companies out there, and it doesn't happen a lot, but like law firms or banks might be one where they want to be the only bank. Like they don't want to see a science fair that's being supported by 4 of the key banks. Like that doesn't. So always be cautious. Like if you have funding coming in from a bank or an local insurance company, you probably want to keep it at one, and not have 5 insurance companies' names on your event.
Yeah.
Right?
And I mean, not that you want to really hedge your bets, but kind of look at all the opportunities. If you have multiple of the same industry talking to you at the same time, kind of look at what they're willing to come to the table with. Because if you lock yourself in for $500 with one, but someone else was willing to give you $5,000, but they want exclusivity and now you've only got $500, it really makes it challenging to kind of go back and say, well, that's nice, great. Now you're locked in for that. So it's like, yeah, and you don't necessarily want to hold out for the best deal, but you just want to make yourself aware of what your options are early so that you can make a really educated decision on what's going to be the right partnership. And sometimes it isn't even about money. It's about the relationship you have with the individual, what they're able to do, how supportive they are in the community, because that in-kind component can be way more valuable than the funding that they give you, especially if it helps to alleviate strain on resources for like human resources. That's a huge factor, because then it means you have more bums in seats and more bodies doing it. And you know what they say is many hands make light work. So that's always something to kind of keep into consideration as well.
Yeah, and then just staying away from any companies or products that don't align with your values.
Yeah.
I once had a tobacco company approach us about funding for another organization. And we went over it back and we're like, we just can't take your money because we don't want to be aligned with a tobacco company, right? So just using common sense when it comes down to it, especially when you're dealing with youth, you want to be just cognizant that all the businesses you're getting support from are above board and respected in the community, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now we have 6 minutes left. Thank you everyone for staying. Obviously, with the conversation that came about after the presentation, this is a very deep topic that we can go on forever and ever. If this is something of interest to anyone, if there are specific questions, like you really want to get down to the nitty-gritties of how to write a grant or something, let us know. We can definitely build some more resources into it to get into it even more.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. You did great.